Thanks, guys. I just noticed earlier today that there was like a discrepancy in the description for this talk that was in the on the website and here, so there might be a little bit of confusion as to what this is about. This is about audio interface systems like Alexa and other voice assistants, and how we can do bad things to them. So the genesis of this talk actually comes out of 2013, where there was a discussion or a bet that went on between what the future of interacting with a computer would look like. And one side you had Google Glass. How many of you remember Google Glass when that was a big thing? Does anybody remember how much Google Glass retailed for? $1,500, all right? And then that was 2013, and then about 2 years later, Alexa actually came out, and that one retailed for about $150. And I remember the entire debate there was, are we going to wear additional equipment on our bodies and turn ourselves more into cyborgs, or are we going to go back to how we can naturally interact with each other, and then have that be an extension of how we interact with computers? And through that, you also had Siri that was coming up, and it's kind of a sad story here that Siri was one of the last acquisitions that Steve Jobs made before he died. And this was like calling, as he was sick, calling and making sure that that acquisition came through. And they pushed it through, and we have Siri on our phones, but now it's been allowed to atrophy to where Siri doesn't really dominate the space anymore. Kind of a swan song there is that Siri has made a comeback as shortcuts that users have kind of propped it up. If you get a chance, look at Siri, hey Siri, I'm being pulled over. There's a fun shortcut system there. But most of you probably saw audio assistants or voice assistants come through really strong in Christmas of last year. That was where my family members got me one Alexa device, and that quickly multiplied into 5 Alexa devices. In fact, 11 million Alexa devices were sold this past Christmas. So many that I had random family members show up with them. Show of hands, who here has an Alexa device in their house? Anybody else have a Google Dot? I actually got excited so much about it that I went and got one of each, and then my nefarious children got them to argue with each other this past Christmas. Do what? Yes. So we got so many of them, we put them all throughout the house, and it wasn't until after we ended up implementing them in our cars that I started to wonder, and this is kind of putting the cart before the horse, what is the security implications? And that's actually the heart of where this entire talk comes from. I try to beat it into my kids. We shouldn't have a world where we have technological magic around us. We should try to figure it out, and in that way, you know what the attack surface looks like. So, I want to start a little bit with how a voice interface system works. Now, in order to know how a voice interface system works, you have to do a little bit of machine learning, and I promise this is going to be like a really fast walkthrough. So to do this, I'm going to borrow from Shazam's white paper on how to do audio fingerprinting. It turns out audio fingerprinting is really old, and it's a fairly simple to grasp concept. First thing you do is you take a segment of audio and you slice it up by windows. And then you take these windows, so this is a segment of a song sliced up into 10 millisecond increments. One thing in the machine learning space in this is that the wider the windows, the faster you can process the audio, but the more you lose out of that audio, and that's going to be very important later. But the narrower the windows, the more accurate you can be, but the more data is required to do the analysis. So, first thing we do is we chop up the audio into windows. The next thing we do is we take the waveform there, we throw out all the other data except for what the highest peak of the audio is, like the highest point of each signal, or of each point in time. And that gives us this nice constellation of points all along the x-axis here. And what that gives us is kind of a waveform. But then we take this and we combine it with, we know where at in each point in time a high point is. And then we know the delta offset of all the other times in that sliding window. So what happens is over time you say I've got a high point here, 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 or these are the frequencies that are the high points. And then over time there's a convergence of this fingerprint matches what I've got stored over here. So you would generally have, like this is one fingerprint in time. You generally have lots of different fingerprints that you're taking over the span of many, many milliseconds, okay? So that kind of like a really rough overview of how audio is fingerprinted and how you say this piece of audio sounds like this piece of audio over here. And that's the first piece of this whole voice audio interface. The second piece is the reason I was talking about the windowing is that the wider the windows, the more susceptible you are to error. And error in this case is there's a very big overlap in the literature between noise and silence. One of the reasons is that at everything is noise at a certain point. And so silence in itself is actually pretty noisy. So if you were to put a speaker in a room and just crank up the gain on it, it would eventually just hammer you with static because there's still stuff going on in that room. Voice assistants have to tackle the far field voice problem. That means that you're not going to get a very clean signal. Like the mics here on me are right next to my mouth. They can get a pretty clean signal, at least that's the idea. A voice assistant needs to be able to pick up my voice across a room. It's actually pretty surprising how resilient an Alexa is to interference. So that's one thing. The next thing is that silence is actually a relative thing. And noise ends up hurting our fingerprinting. Going back to the fingerprint here, if there's noise interference while I'm taking a fingerprint, then I have to wait until the next time, or the next time slot, or the next window to start fingerprinting again. And I'll probably have to take multiple fingerprints, and I'm not going to get an exact match. I'm going to get maybe 80% of the fingerprints to match up, and then I'll have a certain confidence threshold that this fingerprint is a match. Noise comes in, and noise and silence when you're doing audio analysis are roughly the same thing. Like I said, everything is noise at a certain point, and decibels, this is a fascinating thing that I found out. So breathing is 10 decibels, a regular whisper is about 30 decibels. The average normal conversation is 60 decibels, which is basically my son's whispering. And another fascinating fact is Microsoft created a sound dampening room on their Redmond campus, and it went to negative 60 decibels. Something that happens in the human ear is that we lower our ability to process sound by what's ambient around us. You basically get used to the noise around you. If you've ever gone camping and it sounds too quiet, that's the reason. You're adjusted to the higher noise of a city. Well, in this case, if the noise is adjusted to negative 60, you start hearing really interesting things like your own body's mechanics, all the way down to bones grinding on bones. So there's this whole other fascinating field of silence. Another thing with silence is that your cell phone has a lot of algorithms on it just to detect silence, because the cell phone doesn't want to send information that it doesn't have to. And you're probably wondering at this point, what does all this have to do with a voice assistant? The voice assistant is designed to not send all of the data that's around it. It's actually one of the things that I wanted to point out. So when we put it in our car, the first thing I was worried about is it's going to chew through all the bandwidth that I have on my cell plan. But it turns out that it doesn't use very much. It uses about as much as browsing an average website. Yes, the average website is about a meg now, but this means that it's not piping raw audio up to the cloud. That would actually overwhelm the services, or it would just produce a whole lot more processing that Amazon would have to do. So what they do is they take a stream of fingerprints, and those are sent up to the cloud. Now your question is, could they reconstruct the voice that was talking to the Alexa from those fingerprints? Yes, they could. It wouldn't be the exact voice. It would be a very robotic voice. If you've ever been on a voice conference or a teleconference and somebody just starts like getting really pixelated out in their audio, that's what it would sound like. That said, it still contains enough information that it could be useful to law enforcement, investigators, or something else. That's why there's at least 3 pending cases for the Alexa data. But they're not looking for the raw audio. And another interesting point, remember the noise. The Alexa tries to cut out as much of that ambient sound as possible. So it's not going to collect like, there's no CSI here. It's not going to allow you to listen in by some other means of bouncing sound around. The Alexa's designed to pick up on the primary person who triggers it, and then take fingerprints from that source. So the other interesting thing is that the fingerprints are sent over a secured connection. The first versions of the Alexa 2 years ago or so, they had one leg of their connection, I think the provisioning process, that was not secured. From what I could see, there's no raw PCAPs of the data that's sent to Amazon, at least none that are public right now. Even skills are required to use secure connections. So that kind of raises the question, what can we do when it comes to audio? Here's another, here's how the entire loop goes. You tell something to the Alexa, it picks up on the primary speaker. The primary speaker is then, the fingerprints are sent over to the Alexa service, which is a speech-to-text service. That speech is chopped up. You've got the hot word that triggers the device to start listening and to start taking fingerprints. Then it listens for, the next leg of the problem is natural language processing. NLP, because when you talk to the device, you want to be able to use more or less natural, conversational style. The problem is that doesn't actually work very well right now with the Alexa. What it's actually looking for is the action, the skill, the intent, and then what are called slots. Slots are like variables. The skill would be the application, okay? So, moving on along, because this is a lightning talk. So here's the attack vectors in that chain. Here's how they go bad. First of all, the Alexa device is an Android, okay? We could spend a lot of time here talking about the jailbreaking of an Alexa. It's actually, from what I understand, not entirely hard, but it's also not really an attack vector if you've got one locked away in your car or in your house. It would require somebody to jailbreak it and then put malicious firmware. But one thing to note is that Amazon did a really good job with the firmware of the Alexa itself. Like I said, it has the certificates baked in to talk back to Amazon, and there's no public PCAPs that I've been able to find just yet. That said, and also it's worth noting that Amazon thinks that their security is so good that they've sponsored the law that just got passed, I think, in California, that all IoT devices have to have really strong encryption. One way that Alexas can go bad is side channel commands. We'll see an example of that in just a second. One of the big issues with an Alexa is that it is overprivileged. When you provision one, it is assigned to an Amazon account. And there's no way, well, they've added a few ways in the app to limit some of the access that it has. One of the things that you can limit is whether or not the Alexa device can complete a purchase. And that's because early on there were several cases of young children being able to order doll houses and cookies or whatever else on their parents' account. Other than that though, anything you can do, you're doing as the primary account. And the reason for that is that the identification and authorization piece on audio security is not solved yet. It's frightening because about a year ago, the bank that I actually use, Schwab, they came out with a feature that you could voice authorize yourself to your account. And they ripped it out about a month later because that's really insecure. What Alexa does offer though, is if you can have a primary account and you can have sub-accounts that you assign or that you tie into your account. And then what it'll do is it'll try to figure out maybe you, your wife, children, and then try to switch between those accounts based on the voices that it hears talking to it. But that's not at all the same as authorizing you according to these other accounts. Another way that voice assistants could go bad, there's like an entire fascinating field of data capture and exfiltration using super and subsonic channels. We'll get to that in a second too. And the biggest one is that it just generally teaches users bad habits. If you're talking to your device, how many of you have ever seen somebody talking into their device as a search term? Anybody? I was walking around the track behind our house a while back, and I was watching these people talking into their devices and wondering if I could just like walk around with a directional microphone and pick those out. I wonder if it would freak people out if they heard or they were able to like see how easy it is to pull that back out. But we're in the rush to get these voice assistants out to market. We're teaching people bad habits by tying their accounts to these, giving them too many privileges, and just generally not solving some of the authorization problems. So here's the side channel command that I was mentioning. Initially, when Alexa came out, it had no way to say, ignore your keyword for your name. Like if anybody said Alexa or anything that even remotely sounded like Alexa, it would wake up. There was several humorous stories of CNN reports and things like that where they would use the word Alexa. And there was one story where they were reporting on Alexas being used or being triggered accidentally to buy things. And then it triggered all the people that were listening to the report, their Alexas to buy things. And so Amazon came out, I think towards the summer here, of a way to use, or a way for advertisers to use the Alexa or keyword without triggering people's Alexas. And the way they did that was, you can see that this is a waveform of the word Alexa over time. But what's cut out is that middle band there. And so Alexa will see that, and it doesn't trigger because a normal human voice fills that in. But something that's generated from a computer can leave that out. Now I bring that up because this is a benign example of just not triggering Alexa because it's missing that waveform. The human ear fills stuff like this in. And so this is the heart of audio security. We've evolved in such a way that we fill in a lot of data. We do this visually, we do this audibly too. And actually the way that MP3s work is they cut out a whole lot of range of sound. There was this whole, I didn't understand the analog versus digital debate for music until I started really studying how voice assistants work. Because voice assistants are the digital, we're studying the waveform, but then you get into how MP3 is compressed and all that. MP3 just chops out all the additional data. Sort of like a fingerprint, but at a lot higher resolution. So the next thing that I did after analyzing the device and all that is to go into rolling your own voice assistant. It's actually possible. I really didn't like the idea of having all these devices in my house that I had no root access to and no way to really tell what they're doing, other than just trusting Amazon, which they've done a pretty decent job, but I'd like to be able to extend it. One of the things I'd like to do is sound event detection. And we'll get to that in just a second, but there's a lot of other reasons. Learning how voice is processed, you go from the voice to text piece, and then there's the text back to speech piece and all that stuff. Then, the whole keeping data on premises. And one of the big pieces is a voice style transfer. We'll get to that too. So here's a sound event processing that I ran in my own house when we just were watching a movie one night. This is just a normal night in our house watching a movie. And we have things like screaming, smashing, pigs. I think I captured that because there was a .22 hit on a pig. I think it was keying off of squealing or something like that. So this goes to show that model development is really hard when it comes to what the fingerprints. So Shazam was just taking a body of songs and fingerprinting all those songs. And then the service was I could take my phone and hold it up to any source, and it would try to fingerprint against those songs, right? When it comes to voice or speech to text, figuring out how to, so generalizing speech to text is a really hard problem. You have to have a whole lot of data behind that. How many of you guys remember Dragon Naturally Speaking Preferred, or just Dragon Preferred? Anybody have a guess of how old that is? At least 25 years. Yeah, and the initial versions where you had to read it a book, and it would train itself to your voice. Okay? The problem that we have now is for the voice assistants coming out of the box, we want them to be able to pick up on anyone's voice. That's a really hard problem, takes a lot of data to train. And so here are some of the open data sets that I've found. Blizzard challenged, LJ speech. Now the interesting thing about these different data sets is not just the audio collected, but the metadata around it. Because when you want to train, you want to reinforce the training to say, here's what you thought it was, here's what it really was. And so there's different bits that are added to it. LibriVox has a lot of just simple voice audio sample to word. The Blizzard Challenge has a lot of that too. The Ryerson audio-visual database, that adds emotion into it, which is an interesting concept. Amazon recently patented the ability to tell whether or not you were sick by the change of your voice, which is a fascinating concept. Other ones are the Urban Sound Dataset and Google's Audio Set. And I mention those separately because sound event detection is a whole nother realm of audio security. Like being able, so the Alexa actually has a guard mode now that it can listen for breaking of glass and breaking wood. What we really need, one of the saving graces here, is that there's no black market set for models like some model that I can just plug into any other system. All the machine learning scenarios that I've seen all have to be trained in the same one that does the detection, which means that it's not yet possible to just buy a model of someone's voice. So, speaking of that, how to steal a voice. So there's some legitimate uses for how to clone someone's voice. One of the interesting ones that I found was Roger Ebert regaining his voice in 2010 with the help of Cereproc. He basically had, it was cancer of the throat, they had to cut out his larynx, he wasn't able to speak, and he didn't want to go the route of Stephen Hawking's and just have a computer-generated voice. He wanted to reclaim his voice. So Cereproc, which is an Israeli company, offered to help. They said, we've got hundreds of hours of you speaking, we can take your voice, clone it, and you can have your own voice back. It's pretty cool. There's services online that you can clone voices with. Lyrebird and Adobe Voco, which is I think it's only a software as a service. It's basically the Photoshop of voice. But you can also do this on your own. What they use under the hood is called a Generative Adversarial Network, a GAN. So this is two machine learning networks. One is generating, one has the classification, and the other one is generating possible things. And then there's a discriminator that will discriminate based off of what's been generated. Does it match? Does it kind of match what the person wanted in the first place? So you have the original signal, analysis, frame synthesis. Another way to look at this is, let's say you have a training set of handwritten characters, and then you have random noise generator, and then it's generating these possibilities. And you have this possible image that the discriminator says, yes, that looks like an 8. Okay? That's a way that you could basically change the style of someone's handwriting or write a note in someone else's style. Who here has heard of deep fake videos? This is effectively the building block of deep fake videos. Does anybody know how long it takes to create or how much source content it takes to create a deep fake video? It takes many hours of source content. I would dare say about 20 hours or so. It takes a whole lot to create a believable deep fake. Going back to the generative adversarial network, you've got the random noise generator. One interesting side effect of this is you can tell what the training set visually looks like by running random noise through this and just taking the image out of it. How many of you have seen Google's Deep Dream project? The Deep Dream ends up looking like Deep Nightmares, but what it's actually showing you is what the model thinks the ideal form, in this case, of a dog looks like. And you'll notice that it has every facet has a nose, and eyes are kind of a part of it, ears maybe less so. So anyway, you run random noise through it, the discriminator is very indiscriminate, and that's how you end up with images like this. I would argue that the biggest attack vector for audio is social engineering. Personality being the user expression, or the user UX of audio, there's a concern how children interact with Alexa. There's a story that I want to get to, Soupy Sales, 1965. Who's ever heard of Soupy Sales? This is that's awesome. I just came across this. So for those of you who either didn't live through it or weren't or haven't read about it, so there's a guy, Soupy Sales, back in, what was the show that he was on? It was a kids program, and basically he told the kids one morning, New Year's morning, that his parents worked they partied really hard last night to go in there and get the green pieces of paper that had a man's picture on it and send them to him. Now, he claimed he got $80,000 from this. He did get fired from the network, but I don't think he got $80,000. But think about that in the context of these voice assistants that are in homes that don't have all that. Now, I'm out of time, but I'm going to rush through some of this. Another piece of that is audio interfaces are being used for counseling. You've got sarcasm as a service. The reason you would have sarcasm as a service is because you tell it your ideas, and it tells you that all of your ideas are crap. And so you end up arguing with your voice assistant, really defending your ideas, and what that produces is better ideas. The point is these assistants are becoming more human-like as we have more data and we train the NLP processes. The bottom line is don't trust the voice in your head. And in fact, going back to the amount of source data that it takes to clone a voice, researchers out of China have recently put out a paper that it takes about 3.7 seconds to clone someone's voice. So, I leave you with that, and I want you to basically mistrust your Alexa as much as possible. Treat it as a device that is a spyware in your house, but I mean, that's just what I've told my kids too. All right. We've got prizes here in just a second. I've got slides, recap, but if you need, I'll tweet it out later for you guys. All right, we have 3 prizes. Help me out with questions because I'm drawing a blank right now. So does anybody remember? Oh, questions. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Right. The question was if 3.7 seconds won't give you the exact same, it has to do with the resolution of the voice that you're cloning, right? Right. Yes. So he was saying that you could clone the voice, but you can't clone the mannerisms. That's another issue itself. You're right, and there is a style transfer as far as the NLP part of it, and there's a whole fascinating field of cloning child predators, mannerisms, how they speak, and applying that back. And so there's 2 problems there, right? There's the voice itself, and then how the voice is used is the second part. So to give away prizes, because I know that we're tight on time, first prize for the first person that can tell me the type or the technical term for how a voice is cloned. The type of network that is used for a clone. Yes? Adversarial. Yes. Generative adversarial network. Second one would be, yeah.
You can name another activation word for
Yes, another activation word. Gentlemen up here. Yeah. All right. Last one. You have a choice or a preference? There we go. All right. And because I don't work for Amazon and I don't have Alexis. Right.
How many seconds to clone the voice?
That was quick.
I didn't see
I
one.
heard a female voice first, so who screwed it out in this general area?
All right. All right. Thank you. All right, and one last thing to point out. I ran through a whole bunch of source material. I do keep an awesome list for all the references. So if you're interested in like the actual projects for doing this, come see me here, email me. Thank you guys.